Hello students, welcome back to my second video lesson on the story The Last Lesson from your English reader Flamingo. Today we are going to thoroughly interpret the text, but before that, let's have a recap of the last video lesson. At the end of the last video lesson, we noted the following points. Little French late for school. He saw a huge crowd at the town hall in front of the bulletin board. He found an unusual silence at school. He saw the presence of the villagers in the school. Mr. M. Himmel declared the last French lesson. There was a sudden change in French. He suddenly understood the importance of the school and his French teacher, Mr. M. Himmel. Mr. M. Himmel lamented and reflected upon the reasons for the students' deficiency in the French language. Mr. M. Himmel highlighted the importance of French language. Mr. M. Himmel conducted his last French lesson with deep sorrow and dedication. And finally, Vive la France! Long live France! Now let's come to the text interpretation. I hope you all must have taken out your textbook. Now come to the first page. The Last Lesson by Alphonse Daudet, born in 1840 and died in 1897. He was a French novelist and short story writer. The Last Lesson is set in the days of the Franco-Prussian War 1870-1871, in which France was defeated by Prussia, led by Bismarck. Prussia then consisted of what now are the nations of Germany, Poland, and parts of Austria. In the story, the French districts of Alsace and Lorraine have passed into Prussian hands. So let's read the story to find out what effect this had on life at school. What was the effect of that order from Berlin on life at school? I started for school very late that morning and was in great dread of a scolding, especially because M. Himmel had said that he would question us on participles and I did not know the first word about them. He started for school very late that day, French, the little boy, because he was in great dread of a scolding. He was afraid of being scolded because Mr. M. Himmel had assigned this particular homework to all the students to learn the rules of participles by heart and recite in the class in the next day. But little Franz did not know anything about the participles. For a moment I thought of running away and spending the day out of doors. Because he had not prepared his homework, for a moment he thought of running away and spending his time outdoors. It was so warm, so bright. The birds were chirping at the edge of the woods, and in the open field back of the sawmill, the Prussian soldiers were drilling. It was a warm, a bright day. He found the birds chirping at the branches of the trees, and at the back of the sawmill, the Prussian soldiers were drilling. So all these things attracted him. They called him, "Come, friends, come outside. Instead of going to school, why don't you come outside and enjoy this wonderful outdoor activities?" It was all much more tempting than the rule for participles, but I had the strength to resist and hurried off to school. Now these things, the warm day, the warm day, then the birds who were sitting and chirping at the branches of the woods, then the scene of the Prussian soldiers drilling at the back of the sawmill, all these things tempted him, attracted him. It was more attractive than the dangerous rule of participles because he did not know anything about it. So these things attracted him. But finally, he controlled himself and he hurried off to school. When I passed town hall, there was a huge crowd in front of the bulletin board. For the last 2 years, all our bad news had come from there. The lost battles, the draft, the orders of the commanding officer. And I thought to myself, without stopping, what can be the matter now? Now, as he was going very fast for the school, he saw a huge crowd in front of the bulletin board. Bulletin board is like a news board. And he did not stop. to ask the people out there, but they remembered very clearly that all the bad news they had received from that bulletin board, especially about the lost battles, the draft, the orders of the commanding officer. So he was wondering, there was a fear inside him. What can be the matter now? Because there was a strong reason why the huge crowd had assembled in front of the bulletin board. But he did not stop because he was late for the school. Then, as I hurried by as fast as I could go, the blacksmith watcher who was there with his apprentice reading the bulletin called after me, "Don't go so fast, Bob. You'll get to your school in plenty of time." Then he found the blacksmith, Mr. Watcher, with his assistant, who teased him. "Hey, Bob, why are you going so fast? You will be able to reach school in time. You need not go so fast." Now, apprentice is like a student, but they are different from you students, because apprentice is a young person who works for an employer for a fixed period of time in order to learn the particular skills needed in their jobs. They don't have to pay fee the way you do in the school. So Mr. Watcher with his assistant, they were also there. They teased him, "Why are you going so fast? There's still plenty of time. You will be able to reach school in time. So no need to go so fast." I thought he was making fun of me and reached Mr. M. Himmel's little garden all out of breath. He felt that Mr. Watcher was making fun of him, but he did not stop. He went very fast. Then finally he reached Mr. M. Himmel's little garden all out of breath, because he was not going at the normal speed. He was going very fast. So that's why he was all out of breath. Usually when school began, there was a great bustle, which could be heard out in the street, the opening and closing of desk, lessons repeated in unison, very loud with our hands over our ears to understand better, and the teacher's great ruler rapping on the table. But now it was all so still. I had counted on the commotion to get to my desk without being seen, but of course, that day everything had to be as quiet as Sunday morning. Through the window, I saw my classmates already in their places, and M. Hamel walking up and down with his terrible iron ruler under his arm. I had to open the door and go in before everybody. You can imagine how blushed and how frightened I was. Usually, the usual scene of the school was when the school began, there was a great bustle. A confused noise was heard from the school in the street. The confused noise was mainly because of the opening and closing of desks. Then students repeating the lessons together, very loud. And so just because when all the students repeat the lesson together, it's very difficult to understand what they are, reciting or what they are speaking. In order to understand, you have to close your ears. That was the situation. And plus the sound of Mr. M. Himmel's iron ruler rapping on the table. So students were very scared of his iron ruler. So this was the usual scene of the school. But that day, it was so still. There was an unusual silence in the school. Now he has not entered the class. He has just reached the school. So see, this is the first surprise that he found. Unusual silence in the school. He could not understand the reason behind it. At first he thought, as usual, there must be confused noise, so he can take the advantage of this confused noise and enter the class without being seen by Mr. M. Himmel, and he won't be noticed by Mr. M. Himmel and other students that he was a latecomer that day. But this did not happen. I had counted on the commotion to get to my desk without being seen. So I thought I would take the advantage of confused noise and I would enter the class without being seen by Mr. M. Himmel. But of course, that day everything had to be as quiet as Sunday morning. But that day, he found the school so quiet like a Sunday morning. through the window, I saw my classmates already in their places. He saw his classmates who were already in their seats, and Mr. M. Hamill was walking up and down with his terrible iron ruler under his arm. So he was helpless. He had to open the door and he had to enter the class before everybody. So he said, people can imagine how frightened he was, how blushed he was. He was afraid of being scolded by Mr. M. Hamill for being very late in the class. But nothing happened. Mr. M. Hamill saw me and said very kindly, "Go to your place quickly, little French. We were beginning without you." Now, second surprise. But Mr. M. Hamill did not scold him for being late in the class. He saw little French and he said very kindly, "Go to your place quickly, little French. Sorry, we started the lesson without you." So this, unusual kindness of Mr. M. Hamill was very much unexpected. This is the second surprise. I jumped over the bench and sat down at my desk. Not till then, when I got a little over my fright, did I see that our teacher had on his beautiful green coat, his frilled white shirt, and the little black silk cap all embroidered that he never wore except on inspection and prize days. Besides, the whole class or the whole school seemed so strange and solemn. But the thing that surprised me most was to see on the back benches that were always empty the village people sitting quietly like ourselves. Old Hauser with his three-cornered head, the former mayor, the former postmaster, and several other besides. Everybody looked sad, and Hauser had brought an old primer, thumbed at the edges, and he held it open on his knees with his great spectacles lying across the pages. When he was not scolded by Mr. Hamill for being late in the class, he jumped to his seat. And when he was able to control his fear, he looked around, and the third surprise, he saw that Mr. M. Hamill was wearing his special dress. What was a special dress? His beautiful green coat, his frilled shirt, and the little black silk cap all embroidered. This was his special dress that Mr. M. Hamill wore only on inspection and prize days. But that day, he was wearing that special dress. Now, friend couldn't understand the reason behind it. Then the next surprise. Besides, the whole school seemed so strange and solemn. Today there was no noise, and the whole school looked so strange and so serious. But the thing that surprised me most was to see on the back benches that were always empty. Yes, village elders occupied the empty back benches of the classroom. They all were sitting very quietly. Among them were old Hauser, who was wearing his three-cornered hat. There was the former mayor, the former postmaster, and several other village elders. Everybody looked very sad. And old Hauser had also brought an old primer. What is this? Primer. He brought an elementary book for the beginners. He thumbed at the edges. He held that book open on his knees with his great spectacles lying across the pages. While I was wondering about it all, Mr. M. Hamill mounted his chair and in the same grave and gentle tone which he had used to me said, "My children, this is the last lesson I shall give you. The order has come from Berlin to teach only German in the schools of Alsace and Lorraine. The new master comes tomorrow. This is your last French lesson, and I want you to be very attentive." Now, Mr. M. Hamill made a very surprising announcement in the class. He said in a very serious tone, he said, "My children, this is the last French lesson that I'm supposed to give you, because there is an order from Berlin to teach only German in the schools of Alsace and Lorraine." Why only in these two districts? As I have already told you in the last video, that when the story took place, only these two districts of France were captured by Prussians. So those districts or those means territory of France occupied by Prussians. Prussians used to impose German language in those places, in the schools located in those places. And that the new master is supposed to come, new German master would come the next day. That is your last French lesson, and I request all of you to be very attentive. This was the surprising announcement made by Mr. M. Hamel. What a thunderclap these words were to me. Now, these words were like a loud crash made by thunder to French, especially because the village elders and his classmates who were already in their respective seats before he entered the class, they understood the reason behind all the surprises, but Franz had no idea. So when he heard this announcement from Mr. M. Hamel, his words were like loud crash made by thunder. So he said, "What a thunderclap these words were to me. Oh, the wretches! That was what they had put up at the town hall. Oh, that's the order that was placed on the bulletin board near the town hall. Oh, so that's the reason why there was a huge gathering in front of the bulletin board. Now he understood the reason. My last French lesson. Why, I hardly knew how to write. I should never learn any more. I must stop there then. Oh, how sorry I was for not learning my lessons, for seeking birds' eggs, for going sliding on the Saar. My books, that had seemed such a nuisance a while ago, so heavy to carry, my grammar and my history of the saints were old friends. Now that I couldn't give up. And M. Hamel, too, the idea that he was going away, that I should never see him again, made me forget all about his ruler and how cranky he was. So now Franz understood the reason behind all the surprises. Then he realized, oh, today is my last French lesson. But I had not learned how to write my mother tongue till now. And from today onwards, I should never get a chance to learn my mother tongue. I must stop today. Oh, I feel so sorry. I was never serious in my studies. And instead of taking interest in my studies, I was always busy in other unwanted activities like, collecting birds' eggs or going sliding on the Saar. Now, earlier, his books, he never liked them. His books, like, it was a big nuisance to him before this order. They were so heavy to carry. His grammar book, his history books of the saints, he hated them. But today, he felt that his books were old friends that he was not ready to give up. Now, he did not want to say bye-bye to his books. He started loving his books, whom he considered a burden before. And M. Hamel too, the idea that he was going away. He also felt very bad for Mr. M. Hamel also, that from the next day I would never get a chance to see him. Earlier, French hated Mr. M. Hamel, especially his iron ruler with which he used to punish the students. And he also used to consider Mr. M. Hamel a cranky teacher, a slightly ranked teacher. But today, he started loving Mr. M. Hamel. Today he understood the importance of Mr. M. Hamel. He understood the importance of his school. He understood the importance of his books. So this was the sudden change in French. Poor man, it was in honor of the last lesson that he had put on his fine Sunday clothes, and now I understood why the old men of the village were sitting there in the back of the room. It was because they were sorry, too, that they had not gone to school more. It was their way of thanking our master for his 40 years of faithful service and of showing their respect for the country that was theirs no more. He felt very bad for Mr. M. Hamel. Poor man. Oh, these village elders have, come to the class especially to pay homage, to show their gratitude to this wonderful teacher, Mr. M. Hamel. Oh, and Mr. M. Hamel has put on his special dress because that day was his last day in the school. And the villagers as well as the students, especially little French, a lazy student who was never serious in his studies, they felt very bad. They committed a lot of mistakes in the past. Because of that, till that day, they had not been able to write their mother tongue. Village elders, they stopped going to school after means some days. They thought like working on fields or on land, on farms they were more important than learning. But today, it's their last chance to learn their French language. From the next day, the German language would be imposed on them. And they felt very bad that they had not learned anything till that day. They felt very sorry. So they had come to show their gratitude to Mr. M. Hamel for his 40 years of service in the school. And Mr. M. Hamel had put on his special dress because that day was his last day. While I was thinking of all this, I heard my name called. It was my turn to recite. What would I not have given to be able to say that dreadful rule for the participle all through, very loud and clear, and without one mistake? But I got mixed up on the first words and stood there, holding on to my desk and my heart beating and not daring to look up. So he was wondering, little French was wondering of all the surprises. Then he heard his name being called by Mr. M. Hamel because now it was his turn to recite the rules of participles. But he did not know anything about participles. So he started committing mistake just at the beginning. He got mixed up on the first words. And he was so afraid of being scolded by Mr. M. Hamel for not doing his homework. So he held on to his desk, his heart beating, and he even dared not to look up. He had no courage. He didn't even have the courage to look up because he had not done his homework and he was afraid of being scolded by Mr. M. Hamel. I heard Mr. M. Hamel say to me, "I won't scold you, little French. You must feel bad enough. See how it is. Every day we have said to ourselves, 'Bah, I have plenty of time. I'll learn it tomorrow.' And now you see where we have come out. Ah, that's the great trouble with Alsace. She puts off learning till tomorrow. Now those fellows out there will have the right to say to you, 'How is it? You pretend to be Frenchmen and yet you can neither speak nor write your own language.' But you are not the worst, poor little French. We have all a great deal to reproach ourselves with." French expected Mr. M. Hamel to scold him for not doing his homework properly. But Mr. M. Hamel said very kindly to little French, "Little French, I will not scold you today. But I understand you must be feeling very bad today. See how it is. Every day we all have said to ourselves that we have plenty of time. We can learn the next day. We kept on postponing learning. And now you see where we have come out. Today is the last opportunity for us to learn our mother tongue. And this problem is not your problem. This problem is not the problem of you alone. That's the problem of all the people of Alsace. And that's the great trouble with Alsace. She puts off learning to tomorrow. What is the she? Who's she here? Students, here the she is used for Alsace. We can see the use of personification. This is a figure of speech. What is personification? When we give human qualities or the qualities of a living being to a non-living thing. So here she is Alsace. He meant all the people of Alsace district. All of them put off their learning till the next day. Now those fellows out there will have the right to say to you, who are those fellows? The Prussians. When they would be able to, find out that French people, especially the people of Alsace and Lorraine, could not read and write their mother tongue properly, they will dare to say, how is it you French people pretend to be Frenchmen? You're so proud of being a Frenchman, but you cannot speak, you cannot write your mother tongue properly. Mr. M. Hamel continued, but you are not the worst, poor little French. We all have committed mistakes in the past. We all must be blamed for this deficiency. Your parents were not anxious enough to have you learn. They preferred to put you to work on a farm or at the mill so as to have a little more money. And I have been to blame also. Have I not often sent you to water my flowers instead of learning our lessons? And when I wanted to go fishing, did I not just give you a holiday? Not only you, not only the villagers, even I should be blamed for this deficiency. The parents thought it was better for their children to help them in their work on a farm or a land so that they could earn extra money instead of going to school. And I, Mr. M. Hamel, I should be blamed also. I have also committed two mistakes. First of all, I engaged the students to water my flowers in the garden instead of learning their lessons. And the next thing, whenever I wanted to go fishing, I used to declare holiday. These are the two mistakes for which I should be blamed. So he criticized himself, he criticized the villagers, and he criticized lazy students like little French for postponing their learning. And today is the last day for them to learn French language. Then from one thing to another, M. Hamel went on to talk of the French language, saying it was the most beautiful language in the world, the clearest, the most logical, that we must guard it among us and never forget it, because when a people are enslaved, as long as they hold fast to their language, it is as if they had a key to their prison. Then he opened the grammar and read us our lesson. I was amazed to see how well I understood it. All he said seemed so easy, so easy. I think, too, that I had never listened so carefully, and that he had never explained everything with so much patience. It seemed almost as if the poor man wanted to give us all he knew before going away, and to put it all into our heads at one stroke. Then Mr. M. Hamel started praising the French language by calling it the most beautiful language in the world, the clearest language in the world, and the most logical language in the world. And he said, we all should guard our mother tongue among us. We should protect our mother tongue among us. We should keep our mother tongue very close to us. And we should never forget our mother tongue. Because when a people are enslaved, as long as they hold fast to their language, it is as if they had the key to their prison. So, what is the meaning of this line? Students, when Indians were under the British rule, Britishers did not impose such rule on Indians that Indians were allowed to speak and learn their mother tongue. There was no such order. Because of that, our national language, our mother tongue, united all the Indians, and we were able to attain freedom. So, mother tongue is your identity. Mother tongue unites people. So, when a people are enslaved, when the people of a particular nation or territory are, enslaved, when they are put under somebody's rule, as long as they hold fast to their language, as long as they keep their mother tongue very close to themselves, it is as if they possess the key to come out of that prison. So you take the case of a prison. People are kept inside the prison. What is the way to come out of the prison? The key. In the same way, when you are under somebody's rule. But what is the key here to come out of that prison? Your mother tongue. When your mother tongue is close to you, you can come out of that prison. And finally, you can attain freedom easily. This is what he said about the importance of mother tongue. Then Mr. M. Hamel, opened a grammar and he read the lesson to all the students. Now, French was so surprised to see that he was able to understand everything that Mr. M. Hamel was teaching in the class. But before this, he never understood anything because he never took interest. He was never serious. But today, he was able to understand everything so clearly. Whatever Mr. M. Hamel taught in the class, everything seemed so easy to him. He felt that he had never listened so carefully in the past, and that Mr. M. Hamel had never explained so beautifully with so much patience in the past. And he also felt the feeling of Mr. M. Hamel, who was trying to, give whatever knowledge he had to the whole class that day, as if in just one stroke. After the grammar, we had a lesson in writing. That day, M. Hamel had new copies for us, written in a beautiful round hand, France, Alsace, France, Alsace. They looked like little flakes floating everywhere in the schoolroom, hung from the rod at the top of our desk. You ought to have seen how everyone set to work and how quiet it was. The only sound was the scratching of the pens over the paper. Once, some beetles flew in, but nobody paid any attention to them. Not even the littlest ones, who worked right on tracing their fishhooks as if that was French too. On the roof, the peasants cooed very low, and I thought to myself, will they make them sing in German, even the peasants? So after the grammar lesson, they had the lesson in writing. And that day, Mr. M. Hamel brought new copies for all the students in the class. And on the cover of those new copies, he wrote with beautiful round hand, France, Alsace, France, Alsace. His homage to French language. Now there was pin-drop silence in the classroom. Only the sound of the scratching of the pen over the paper was heard. During the class, some insects, beetles, flew in, but nobody paid any attention to those beetles because all of them were very much attentive. Now, little French, how he showed his anger and hatred towards the Prussians. He made a sarcastic remark. Will they make them sing in German, even the peasants? Will the Prussians also pass an order for the peasants to coo in German language, not in French language? This very sentence showed his strong feeling of hatred again towards the Prussians. Whenever I looked up from my writing, I saw M. Hamel sitting motionless in his chair and gazing first at one thing, then at another, as if he wanted to fix in his mind just how everything looked in that little schoolroom. Fancy! For 40 years he had been there in the same place with his garden outside the window and his class in front of him. Just like that. Only the desk and benches had been worn smooth. The walnut trees in the garden were taller, and the hope vine that he had planted himself twined about the windows to the roof. How it must have broken his heart to leave it all, poor man. To hear his sister moving about in the room above, packing their trunks, for they must leave the country next day. When the writing class was going on, Franz looked up. He saw Mr. M. Hamel sitting motionless in his chair. He looked so serious. He was looking at all the things in the classroom, one after another, as if he wanted to fix the memory or the photograph of all those things in his mind. For 40 years he had spent in that school. The garden outside the window of that classroom. See, 40 years back when he started the school, he must have arranged new furniture, desks and benches. Now what are the changes after 40 years? Those desks and benches have been worn smooth. The walnut tree in the garden that he planted, now they were so tall. And hope vine that he had planted, it has reached up to the windows, to the roof. So leaving all this thing behind, this must have been, very painful for him. It must have broken his heart. Then upstairs, his sister was packing the trunk because in that order he was also asked to leave the country France the next day, an inhuman order. But he had the courage to hear every lesson to the very last. After the writing, we had a lesson in history, and then the babies chanted their ba, babe, bee, bo, boo. Down there at the back of the room, old Hauser had put on his spectacles and holding his primer in both hands, spelled the letters with them. You could see that he too was crying. His voice trembled with emotion, and it was so funny to hear him what we all wanted to laugh and cry. Ah, how well I remembered it, that last lesson. Mr. M. Hamel, he had the courage to hear every lesson till the end. After the writing lesson, they had a lesson in history. All the babies chanted this alphabets, ba, be, bi, bo, boo. Then old Hauser, who brought his primer, this primer, I already told you, this book for the beginners. And he opened the book and he was also reciting the alphabets with the babies. At the same time, he was crying. His voice trembled with emotion. And French felt that he remembered that last lesson so clearly. Why? Because he was serious that day. He had strong interest in learning that day. That's why he was able to remember everything that happened on the last day. All at once the church clock struck 12. Then the Angelus. At the same moment, the trumpets of the Prussians returning from drill sounded under our windows. M. Hamel stood up very pale in his chair. I never saw him look so tall. When the church clock struck 12, that was the signal for the class to be over. And the Angelus. Angelus is a midday prayer. It's a custom in the Roman Catholic. So when the church clock struck 12, at the same time, the trumpets of the Prussian soldiers returning from drill were also heard. Means the class was over. Then Mr. M. Hamel stood up, very pale, in his chair. I never saw him look so tall. Here, it doesn't mean he looked tall that day and he never looked tall in the past. He looked so tall today. That day means he looked so serious when he stood up in his chair, because it was for the time. Because the time was over. The class was over. My friends, said he, I, but something choked him. He could not go on. He said, my friends, I. After that, he could not continue. He was choked with emotion. Then he turned to the blackboard. He took a piece of chalk, and bearing on with all his might, he wrote as large as he could, Vive la France. Then he turned to the blackboard. He took a piece of chalk. He went towards the blackboard and he gathered all his strength and wrote Vive la France on the blackboard. So you can understand the feeling of Mr. M. Hamel, how sad he was. He was full of emotions. Vive la France. This he wrote on the blackboard. Long live France. Then he stopped and he leaned his head against the wall. He leaned his head against the wall, and without speaking anything, he made a gesture. Gestures is when you make a body language without speaking with his hand. School is dismissed, you may go. He didn't say this. His body language suggested that he wanted to say to the students, school is dismissed, you may go. In this way, the last French lesson ended. Students, I hope you must have been able to understand the text through this second video lesson. After this, I request all of you to go through the text as many times as you can. And in the meantime, if you find any difficulties, please share your problems. In the third video, we are going to discuss the important questions, short as well as long questions, which are very important from the examination point of view. Till then, bye-bye. Stay safe, stay healthy.